On to this now. The African continent needs to overcome its dangerous dependence on the West and pioneer its own medical research. This is according to Advocacy Group one day soon as Africa chapter manager Zacharia Kafuko. In an article, Kafuko says Africa should set up self-sufficient medical research facilities on the continent. He says this would serve as a better economic model in Africa. This as the world continues to battle the coronavirus. He joins us now for more on this. Thank you very much for joining us. Given that a number of doctors on the continent study abroad and study quite widely, why is it that we're still finding in 2021 that we are not able to come up with solutions for ourselves?
Right. Thank you so much. So the best way to respond to that would be, obviously, as a continent, we haven't put enough in terms of investment in medical research or research and development in general. And as a result of this, what we are seeing now is a situation where our brilliant minds cannot conduct research on the continent, and they are forced in a way to go and pursue this form of research in other countries outside the continent. And this is the situation that we've seen even in terms of development of vaccines for this current pandemic of COVID-19.
You mentioned in your article that the continent has a long unhealthy pattern of dependency on the West across all sectors, including education, amongst others. So in terms of this COVID-19 vaccine and finding it for ourselves, what is the danger in us not being able to find the solution for ourselves?
All right, so if I was to respond to the danger, I would take it in two parts. So the first part is the misinformation that has seemingly been very prevalent on the continent. There's a lot of conspiracy theories, there's a lot of intended misinformation on the part of the continent, because we as a continent, we as Africans, we are dealing with a pattern where the citizens seem to be afraid of vaccines coming from Western countries. I'm sure you've already heard so many of these stories that no, Western vaccines are going to do this to us, they're going to do that to us, and this, of course, is unscientific in reasoning, right? So we are becoming more and more hesitant towards medication coming from Western countries. And the second effect I would talk about is what is happening right now. Other countries around the world, in the Western countries like in Europe, in America, they have gone so far in terms of their vaccination campaign. In Africa, we are still technically at zero. Why? Because we can't gain access to this life-saving medication. And it's understandable because obviously the countries that are developing these drugs, these vaccines, they also need to inoculate their populations. So it is going to be a very interesting argument if we ask them to stop vaccinating their population and give the vaccines to us as Africans, right? So the only option that is available to us as a people, as a continent, is we are going to be forced to start waiting until there are enough vaccines for everyone in other parts of the world to be vaccinated, which is why in the article I wrote, I also mentioned that it is important that as a continent, we must be seen to be taking deliberate actions to invest in research, in medical research, in development, and this is a narrative that we are pushing as one day sooner African chapter.
Are we not, though? So you've got the likes of the Africa Center for Disease Control. Yes, it was established in 2016, but some headway is being made there. There is also a Zimbabwean doctor who was involved in finding, in doing the vaccine for one of the vaccine companies. So you do find great minds from the continent that are pushing this.
I agree with you, and I think this is something that I indicated just from the onset of my article, that Africa has brilliant minds, yes, like everywhere else in the world. But the problem is less about intelligence and more to do with maybe a policy or specific implementation of these needed interventions to try and change the narrative of the continent. While it may be true that we have brilliant minds, if we do not have state-of-the-art research facilities on the continent, how then can we be seen to be doing this research, to be doing clinical trials, to be doing medical development on the continent? It becomes impossible First, we must bring to the continent, on the continent, the state-of-the-art modern research facilities that is going to attract the brains that we already have on the continent to begin to be doing this research. It is true that there are individuals here and there on the continent that have participated, that have contributed to the general campaign in terms of medical research that has gone into COVID-19, but these are isolated incidences. Right? These are isolated cases where people have gotten connections and have contributed in this way. But what I argued to have on the continent, at least from the perspective of One Day Sooner, the African chapter, is to have a deliberate policy, either led by the African Union or governments as individuals, to invest directly into creating facilities that promote research, that also encourage participants on the continent to take part in these clinical trials.
So we need to be deliberate, or more deliberate with our actions. How do we break from the norm and not maybe depend on governments? Perhaps you yourself, you're a molecular biochemist, yourself, your colleagues, people whom you know. Is there nothing that we can do to sort of rally and gather together to create these institutions? If we wait any longer, we might just get left behind again.
Thank you. That's a very good question. So the first part I would say is collaboration. I think if countries, if scientists, researchers, experts on the continent can collaborate across borders, I think this would go a long way in, lessening the burden that is currently on the continent in terms of investment in research. Just as an example, if, for example, we have South Africa, we have Zimbabwe, we have Zambia, we have Kenya, we have Nigeria, and these countries pool their resources together to maybe set up a research facility, the cost would be less a burden if it is done in this way. But the problem is we are not doing that right now. And the second approach is currently we have more than 50 billion US dollars that are coming on the continent in terms of official assistance from donors from other parts of the world. Now, this assistance is basically what I would call, from hand to mouth. We are using this specifically to survive. Now, what we needed to do is to change this pattern so that when these donations or when this fund is coming in, we can invest in more permanent solutions. And that's why I think when you started, you rightly put it as, in my argument, I think it serves a better economic model if we can invest these huge sums of money into permanent solutions like having our own research facilities rather than, depending on donations to receive vaccines, which we use. When we have a cholera outbreak, we depend on these vaccines. Again, they are given to us as medication, we use. When we have malaria issues, we are given, we use. When we have HIV issues, we are given, we use. This dependence cannot go on forever. It puts us as a continent on a very, very, bad path, so to speak. And the only way to break this is if we start to invest in long-term permanent solutions. Like I argued, this would take the form of setting up research facilities on the continent where our experts can do this research.
And if we're not deliberate, to your point, the saying African solutions to African problems will forever be just a proverb that we use instead of action. Thank you very much for your time. One Day Sooner chapter manager, that is Zacharia Kafuko.